This is a presentation on AI assistant widget development. And we did a research with a few colleagues. Erick, who is sitting here in the front, he will join later. Tobias is at home. He's in Germany. He had a rough cold, so he wasn't able to make it in person. Otherwise, he would be here. And Lukas, also a colleague from Germany. He helped us out a lot as well. But moving on, I want to ask, who of you is a maker? I think we have a lot of makers here. Yeah, all makers, that's a good thing. But how much time do you actually spend making? So on a regular day, who is making things 8 hours a day? Maybe 6 hours, 6 hours a day on average. Yeah? 4 hours on average. 2 hours on average? 2 to 4, okay. Or did I miss the 1 hour? And keep that in mind. And how much time do you spend actually in Studio Pro? So besides of the making, especially in Studio Pro or another IDE, Visual Studio, whatever. Again, 8 hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, 2 hours. Oh, it's almost the same. So we are, if we're making, we're doing this very well. And AI, generative AI, it's all over news. We know that. We see new models, new assistants coming by every other day. So therefore, we thought, well, it would be interesting to compare them with Mendix in mind. But there's also quite some criticism, basically mostly on privacy, but also on the energy consumption, for example. So the prompt I just shared with you, I think I burned for 30 liters of water to boil it. So that's a bit unfortunate, and we're tackling that. So the AI assistants are coming, and we already have a lot. What you see here is the traffic to Stack Overflow. And it was a very compelling picture of when ChatGPT, I think it was 3 or 2, entered the market around early 2022. And then the traffic to Stack Overflow dropped tremendously because people started to using that assistant, and asking questions was way easier than looking for it themselves. But yeah, then it's unfortunate that ChatGPT was trained with data from Stack Overflow. So this will be a problem someday. And we're also talking about sizes. So you see the, let's see, it was a GPT-2 from OpenAI, and there we had the introduction of ChatGPT-3. And you see the enormous size comparison of those large language models. And even the models that have been introduced now, so the ChatGPT 4.0, very recently, it's I don't think it will fit on this slide deck. But if we talk about the size of such a model and also the capabilities of a model, we can talk about 3 major topics. Just to summarize a bit on what's behind, we have parameters. So that's the variety of knowledge that a certain model can take into account. So the more parameters, the more diverse the model can be. And we have the training set. Of course, we need to feed it something. If it has a very big brain, but you don't feed it something, then it will stay stupid. That's the magic here. And then tokens. What you now see is that as soon as you are starting to ask more complex questions and you want to add data to your question, so for example, a Word document or a knowledge base or whatever, then you want to add it as context to your large language model. And the more you can add as a context, the more tokens you need. So you see that when comparing several assistants, as soon as they can handle more tokens, then they can also handle more context. But back to the widgets, because that's where we're here for. And we prepared just a rough journey to the widget development cycle. And before we do that, just a quick question: who built a widget ever? That's, I think, 20% for a while. And who changed a widget? Already a bit more for a while. And who of you would like to make a widget? It's funny that fewer people like to build a widget than actually did, so tell something. And it's always a challenge. So of course you have a requirement and the platform cannot provide it out of the box. So that could be a moment at which you think, well, maybe I will build a widget. And then, yeah, we know step 1, just don't do it. It's This presentation, it was prepared by André Smit. I think some of you know him. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to present it himself today, but he told me many, many times that he built widgets 10 years ago, and people are still haunting them for those widgets because his name is in the documentation, so they know, hey, Andres, could you please add this and this feature for me? So therefore, he's telling us, don't do it. So again, it's good to rethink. Potentially, you can use something else, or the requirements aren't that strict, so you can propose something else. You can also have a look at the marketplace, because a lot of widgets are already available. And potentially, you just need another way of searching to find it. Ask around, especially if you have colleagues who ever build widgets or know people at partners, or go to the Slack, go to the forum, and ask around to see if there's already something out there. Then you don't need to build it yourself as well. And be creative. So there are also a lot of widgets you can use creatively. For example, the HTML widget. You can do a lot in there without the need to build a widget. And potentially it's even more comparable or easier to understand for the people who are also using or working in your project. And then this pretty quote, to be or not to be, that's the question. And Andries added his own quote to that, to build or not to build. And then we have this example. So we have the file upload. This is the default file uploader from Mendix, which you get out of the box. And this is what you want. You want to have an upload button. But luckily, you can build that by using just the file upload JavaScript action, which was delivered by Cobeon. And it's available from the marketplace. And this toaster message, also a pretty one. And we have two options there. So there is either a widget in the marketplace available, but you can also add, I think it was a JavaScript action, which you can utilize to create this. So again, no widget needed. And then this one, the multiple progress bar. So you see multiple colors in here. That won't be possible with the default progress bar widget, I can promise you. Do we need a widget for this? No? Or do we? I don't know. Styling? CSS. CSS all the way. Then you can fix everything. It's also true. Well, the HTML widget. You can, with some very basic HTML, with some styling, with some parameters, with some variables, things that are quite known to most Mendix developers, you can use that to build something like this. So again, no widget needed. And this. It's a table with variable columns. And we all know that this could be a solution. We all went to the list view and list view and list view pages. But do we need a widget for this? If we want to have this more pretty. Not anymore. Spoiler. Oh, there is one as well. The dynamic data grid. It's also in the marketplace. And it's very effective for handling data more efficiently as well. Also when looking at your database retrieves coming from this thing. Something to keep in mind is the total cost of ownership. It's not only you building that widget for maybe 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, but it will also be costly later because someone needs to maintain it. That thing will break. You will have a Mendix version upgrade, whatever. There will be a feature very specifically needed to or requiring an adjustment in that widget. So there is more cost involved. And there is also risk. So losing the source code, especially if it's not in GitHub and it's someone's PC or whatever, then it's easier to lose. You're dependent on libraries. I've seen widgets, also very successful widgets in the marketplace, which are very successful as of today. I think the autocomplete is one of them. It's using quite an outdated library, which was not maintained since 2020. So then it's also like a liability on those libraries. The Mendix API is changing. Again, version updates, the pluggable widgets nowadays, compared to the dojos earlier, it's also something to maintain. Licensing could be an issue as well. So moving on, where do we start? And we have a few things that you can consider using, and I won't go through them all, because the most important thing is that you get a mentor. Do it together. It's a new language. Same as you did once with Mendix. You had, hopefully, a mentor next to you who you can ask questions and just spar on certain ideas or solutions. It's also very important for developing things in high code, widgets in this case. So you can use a library. Libraries are available a lot, mainly in the NPM repository, as some might know. There you can build pretty charts. So most of the Mendix platform supported widgets are also using such a library. And there it's good to first search for them. So you have a purpose and you think there should be a library. Most often there is one. Then you can reuse whatever is in there. So you don't need to build it yourself. And you just hook it up to the Mendix API, because that's what you're doing when you're building widgets. You're hooking up your library to the Mendix platform, and that's what you're doing there. When you're looking at those libraries, then there are a few things to consider. And you can just scan the slide, so I won't name them all. But I think one of the most important things is like the contributors and the, I think the issues. But it's mainly how actively working is the community on that library. If it was published like in 2022 and there was no update since, then you could say, well, that's quite a recent widget or quite a recent library. But if it was just a pet project of some individual, then you could also consider not using it. So it's good to track what's the history behind that, that library you're actively using. Well then, oh, this is also working. That's amazing. This is it's under 10 minutes, so we will now just wait 10 minutes. No, that's a joke. No, it's speed up to 2 minutes. But what you see here is the entire journey of the Mendix widget development. So I can skip through if you all say, well, we've seen this before. But otherwise, we will just move to the several phases. So first, we had the scaffolding of the widget. Mendix does it out of the box. So you can use a few commands, follow the documentation, and really quickly you have a project standing to do your magic. Here we see that the code was added from the learning path. It's also available, made available by Mendix. So you can create a basic text input widget. We build that with the built-in npm build command. And then we can also see if it works in our Studio Pro environment. So Andres is so fast. It's amazing. Whoop, whoop. We don't show this to customers, otherwise they think we are fast. And there it goes. So this is like the basic example. Then you will release it because there is a lot of bulky code in there because it's easier to debug. So it's always good to build a proper release build so you can put it somewhere publicly. Well, and here you see that Andres is publishing it to our CLEVR Solutions Git repository. So all our colleagues can also access that repository so that as soon as someone leaves the company, we still have the code and we can maintain it and deliver support upon it. And he's using some Git commands to make that happen. This could also be done in a graphical UI if you prefer that. You have GitHub Desktop, so don't be scared if you now see command prompt and you think, I don't like this. There are alternatives as well. Well, moving on, you see that it's already there. Version 1. There it goes. And then we will add it to the marketplace. This could be either the public marketplace, then everyone can download it, or the company marketplace. So that's a private marketplace for your company only. And you see that a lot at larger companies which build multiple apps. And it could be useful to spread the word. But also within larger partners, you see this happening a lot. And then I think there will be sparkles quite soon now. Confetti. Yeah. And that was it. So he did this in under 10 minutes. So it's quite doable to get this started. But of course, this is not the hard part. That's something we come into quite soon now. So some free takeaways shared by Andres with his 10+ years of widget development. I won't repeat them for you. Let's see if there is one that's popping out. I think they're all very important. But the rebuild and refactor, I think every line of code is built at least 3 times, we say. And I think that's also applicable to the things we build in Mendix itself. So first you make it work, then you make it pretty, and then you make it performing better, best, shippable. So I think that's also applicable to the widgets. And that will be the end of at least this part of the presentation, or it is just the beginning. because we were here for the assistance. So here we see a few logos. We have AWS Code Whisperer. It's now called Q. They did that, I think, 2 weeks ago, officially. Then we have Google, that's Gemini. Then we have Microsoft, it's offering Copilot. And then we have OpenAI with the ChatGPT you also saw earlier. We used version 4 to be specifically. You can use AI assistants for various use cases. And that's why we added this slide, just to spark some thoughts on what you can use it for, in addition to just building widgets or building logic, building code. You can also do it to explain code. That's, yeah, it's here. That's one of the options I enjoy most, as if there is something in the marketplace which is behaving quite strange, and you want to fix it yourself, then this is very effective of explaining what's actually happening in that code, especially if the language is new to you. So if it's JavaScript and you're not known to JavaScript, it could be very helpful that someone just tells you on this line, this is happening. So it's also very informative for you to learn a new language. It can help you in generating test scripts. Who of you built test scripts? All right, again, the 20%. It's your work. Yeah. Cheater. But also here, the AI assistants can help you, especially for creating unit tests on high code. They are very, very effective in creating generous data sets, for example, to do data-driven testing with some varieties in there. I think it's helpful to use tooling for that as well. But that's not what we did, because what we did was build a widget with the AI assistants. We started off by the 3, 4, 5 assistants. We ended up in being able to test 3 very properly. So that is all the ones I just shared, except for the Code Whisperer. And before we start, I want to give it all for both Eric and Tobias, who is at home, but he's listening, and he can also tap into the session while we're at it. So Eric, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, nice to meet you, everybody. My name is Erick. I work for CLEVR for almost 3 years. I joined in June of 2021. I've been working with Mendix since 2017. Right now, I'm an expert developer. Also, I'm enthusiastic to build custom widgets, like you guys are going to see right now in a few minutes. So that's pretty much it.
Thanks, very nice.
Sure.
That's also a great reason to have you here, because you already know a lot on widget development. So it's also very doable for you to assess the actual response from those assistants.
Yeah.
So then hopefully Tobias is also hearing us.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me?
Can you briefly introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a UI UX consultant for CLEVR since 2018, but my primary background is actually in programming. And so what I also do here is front-end related programming tasks with CSS and anything related to widget development as well.
Very well. And thank you for the introduction. We will touch base very soon if we move into the content itself. And we did use a use case to make something a bit more tangible. We did build a canvas widget.
Yeah, a drawing colorful lines widget in Mendix. So I think it would be a good example to tackle, because that's something that Mendix itself cannot handle, like drawing over the screen, changing colors, stuff like that. And also saving the drawing in a Mendix object record. Yeah.
And to support this presentation, we used videos. So you can see them here while we discuss what you see here. So it might be a bit distracting, but then you know what they're here for. I will peek on this page, because then the number corresponds with what we're seeing here. So I still know where we are. But what we saw is that you both had another approach. So you built the basic project with the scaffolding of Mendix itself, where Tobias asked for the entire project to be built by the assistant. So you were using Copilot from Microsoft. Tobias was using ChatGPT 4, and he used Gemini later. But Gemini went rogue, but we will see that in a second. This is the ChatGPT example. I want to create a magic widget. And while we're watching at this, what were your experience with the first result, like the first response?
Was pretty interesting. It gave me all the steps from the very beginning, creating a widget from scratch, literally like running the initial command to build a widget. And MS Copilot, you have like 3 levels of interaction. You have balanced, creative, balanced, and more detailed answers. I tried the more detailed answers because I wanted more precise answers. But the first prompt, it gave me very good results, like the basic steps of how to create the widget. Not with details, fully detailed, but at least the first steps would be, well, pretty cool, very nice.
Cool, it's great hearing that. And I think that's also a recent development because I tried assistants 2 years ago, and then all the answers were still Dojo related or not Mendix specifically, or just doing stuff with random web application stuff. So you see a great improvement there already. Well, moving on, this is the third one. Yeah, it wasn't the first time right. So here you say that you didn't understand step 3, and you could have another explanation.
Yeah, exactly, because step 3 was not very clear to me. I mean, reading this as a non-expert in building widgets, I think it might be hard to understand how to implement. So could you please give me more details about it, like explain it better? And that's exactly what the MS Copilot did.
Very well, and here we see the example of Tobias. And then he did the steps, but he gave the widget another name. So then he asked the assistant to rename everything. And what you see is that it gives quite an extensive answer in just renaming the entire thing. But then it switched to using TypeScript. So the first version was full JavaScript, and you can pick either TypeScript or JavaScript when building your widget. So then the assistant just decides to use another flavor. So it's interesting to see what happens there, why, and it's also something it's important to stay awake. Let's see if there is more. Yeah, he asked to change back, and then the assistant did as well. The fifth one. Yeah. This was surprising to me. I think, yeah, it was. Is it the fifth one? Yeah. Oh yeah, it was returning more code than asked for because you didn't ask for an header.
Didn't.
No, but it's there.
Figures. I also got surprised. I mean, I could just remove it, get rid of it, but maybe because I say, well, it's a drawing widget, so he thought maybe it would be nice to give a name it. Sort of figures.
Yeah, very well. But again, it's good to know at least something that you know what you're doing, because if you don't know that much of HTML and you think, well, I can build a widget, then you will end up with just a random header in your hard-coded widget. So moving on to the sixth one, what we have here. Yeah, you were asking to, let's kick it on. You said my widget is a function-based component, so I asked to do it like that. So can you elaborate on that? Because I think this is quite a, you have to have some knowledge on widget development to ask a question like this.
Yeah, exactly, because I'm used to create widgets in function-based components, but he gave me an example using classes. So just please give me the function component, please.
But the good thing is that eventually, in under 8 minutes on the clock, you already have something that's actually working. So that's pretty nice. But now, are we done? Is this? Can we ship this?
No, not yet.
Oh.
I mean, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, I remember I asked it to remove the grid because the canvas has a grid, and I asked him to remove it. how can I remove this? And I know that the library has a prompt.
Oh, we will come to that. We will come to that. But it's a good teaser. Here we have Tobias again. Let's see. Because he succeeded in having that prototype, so very comparable in around 20 minutes. So that's also very doable. But there was some bug fixing going on. So the first version didn't work as expected. So what you see here is that Tobias is feeding back all the errors that he gets from either his browser console or from Studio Pro directly. And then you see that eventually, I think with 3 attempts, that the assistant is able to say, well, I'm very sorry, because they always say that they are very sorry. And then they will give you the end result. So again, partially working example here. But this is very basic, as you mentioned. So you asked for, let's go, how can I remove the grid from the canvas? And there it goes. Maybe you can tell something in advance already.
Yeah, exactly. I've used this library before. I know there's a proper to just pass pause and get rid of the grid. But the compiler told me to use CSS to remove the grid, which is nonsense.
Hack it away.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're insisting, right?
Yeah.
Like really pushing.
I know you can do it.
And then it's asking something interesting. So if you're still having trouble, could you please provide more details about the package or library you're using? So it's actually asking for documentation on the library. Can you please tell me how? And here we have selecting colors. It's also working. That's nice. Okay. Let's see what happens here. Some specific colors: red, yellow, blue, and green. Can you show me how to in the component? I think what's interesting about the questions you both asked, they are not too long. They are not too explicit, so to say. You're not asking for a button. You're not asking for a picker of. You're just asking for the feature.
Yeah.
And still, it's quite able to come up with a drop-down in this case. You didn't ask for a drop-down, but it thought, well, then you might want the drop-down.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting, and hopefully when, no, it's a bit later. But Tobias built something, asked somewhat the same question, but he got a way different result. You will see that in a minute. Maybe you want to add something more while I continue to the color picker and the clear all. What did you think of the results? Were you happy? Would you have done the same?
I was not expecting a drop down. I was expecting something like you click in a button, green square, something like that, and then you can draw red lines, for instance.
Here you wanted to have the color picker.
Yeah.
Quite a simple prompt, and he got the color picker. So. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the built-in HTML color picker. So it's a default component, which is
HTML5. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just there. So it's nothing spooky there as well, because we also saw a lot of jQuery going on there. But that was not this. Then I think you asked for the clear button.
Yes.
Oop. Yeah. Moving on to 11. That's Tobias. Yeah, that was also interesting. He wanted to have the full width. So you can see that he's asking here. And then Tobias, if I'm not mistaken, and we see that that will happen quite soon, is that ChatGPT at this point, it started to forget things from the past. Is that correct?
Yes, so here it's forgetting to import the create element function from React. And it keeps doing that throughout the entire experiment.
Yeah, so that was giving you quite some errors along the way. So if you're not that known to using JavaScript or building widgets, would you think that it was easy for you to understand what was actually going wrong? Or would you see this as a big downside of using it like this?
I mean, if you have to resort to using ChatGPT to get a result at all in any language, and you stumble upon on an error like this, and if at first it does not appear, and then somehow along the way this error is introduced, then I think that's very confusing to beginners. So I think if you stumble upon this error, if you had created the code yourself, I think you would fix it more easily or understand the source of the issue more easily if you understand what you coded. But if the code is entirely provided by ChatGPT and at first it works and then it doesn't, I think that's quite confusing, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And thanks for adding that. And here we see that this is a way different result. With one prompt, he added 3 features, and it's working quite nice. Already with the color picker inside, the clear button. I do like actually the slider to determine the width of the pencil. That's
yeah,
funny.
I think it's interesting since the prompts are not very specific, as you said. I'm just asking for a feature. So ChatGPT takes some liberty in how it solves that, also from a UI perspective. And I was also quite surprised at what it decided to do here. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you, Tobias, because I also think that's already a learning. Here we see still an example of the third-party color picker, because we wanted to have a more fancy one. And while we're talking through, we will see that it will break everything.
Okay.
So eventually it wasn't possible anymore to draw things. So then you will see that in a minute that it will deliver the fancy color picker, but then it's not possible to draw anymore. So that's a bit unfortunate. But what we did see is that as soon as the answer grows, so if your question is more generic or it takes the previous input into account, then it can start to become wobbly at some point. So asking very specific questions on, I have this piece of code and I want to add that specific feature to it, gives a higher chance of success. So here you see that, quite a decent color picker. I do feel the frustration through the... I now have it, but it's not working. It's also good to mention that both videos were over 2 hours of content. So they spent quite some time on it.
Yeah.
You will have the summary. Number 14. Yeah, I think this is the moment where you tell them you have that prop.
Yeah.
So it was asking for the documentation before. So yeah, tell me how. And then Erick told them, you have the prop. Again, sorry. And there it is. And then it worked, right?
Actually did, but...
Yeah, I think this one did.
Yeah.
But now things become really hard because we now have that pretty drawing, but it's just in our browser. So we want to store that to a Mendix object. And a Mendix object is quite a specific thing. It's not something known to React or whatever, like a common language, it's Mendix. So I think, as a spoiler, both you, Erick, and Tobias, you struggled a bit in saving stuff.
Quite a lot.
I hear you were asking, you see some things are going quite okay. So MX data, that's the Mendix API, actually. So what was do you think everything went wrong?
Everything went wrong. Because as you said, it's very specific. And I've built this before. I know the drill, but I wanted Copilot to tell me how to do this for someone who doesn't know the drill. But apparently he gave me instructions that just don't work. Yeah, you guys will see, because this approach, it won't work.
It's a lot of going back and forth. So first we had like one prompt and then it gave magic, but now you see already some struggling going on.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and this is 15, yeah. Yeah, this will, oh, I think, oh, I'm not sure. Maybe I just cut the video, but this went really wrong because you had to stop the assistant actually because it was looping.
Yeah, I have to like, okay, let me try to help him to give him the answer because maybe if I ask him to, okay, I give you maybe we can use an attribute to save the base 64 of the image, then I can run a callback microflow to save the image in my application. Perhaps this would help him to give me the instruction to save the image. But also didn't work.
And it started to get loopy and repeating itself and repeating itself.
Then I just gave up.
I think we see something happening here already. Let's.
Those other properties.
Yeah, it's turning off. Yeah, one of the things I found surprisingly goodish was that it was adding error handling, actually. So on the save logic, it was already catching as exceptions, and it was adding something to the log. So you see that here. So it is doing a console log that something went wrong while performing that commit, and I was happily surprised that there was something in there. But I also saw that you just went on and left it in there, which is not very strange. But I also think that this is one of the main risks of using AI assistant development in general, that whatever is there, you will use it. So if the error handling here seems fine to you, or you're not paying attention to it because your goal is to make it work, then this will be the thing that ends up in production. And the error handling will be something logged to the console.
Absolutely.
Period. Yeah. But I was surprised that there was something in there. Yeah, I also saw something on callbacks, and my JavaScript knowledge isn't that super. But from what I've heard is that promises are way more modern, more recent. Did you have some feeling that the assistant was not using best practices or the most state-of-the-art technology, and it was using potentially even outdated patterns? Or what was your...
I don't really use promises, at least creating widgets. The callbacks are pretty enough for widgets from my perspective. I know there's a callback there, and I thought, okay, maybe I can use that later, or Copilot to say you can use a callback to save the image. But it was not the result that I was expecting. The promises, wouldn't use promises unless you do some batch calls, stuff like that.
That's very good to know. So you're telling that the result was of high enough quality. So potentially not knowing enough of Mendix, but in general, it was good. Let's see what's happening here. Here you went testing. Create block was not a function. Ah, you're moving back to the original approach that you wanted to store it in a string.
Yeah. Because it looks like Copilot is not familiar with the Mendix library yet.
I think this example, Tobias, you had somewhat the same experience, right? When using ChatGPT.
Yes, indeed. So I don't know if you show this, but I had to revert to a previous state of the code because it would not work with the fancy color picker. And yeah, so when it came to concrete Mendix knowledge that would be required to handle this step, it also failed on the domain model part where it said things like what was it? Add a property of type system image. So I was like, huh? What do you mean?
Yeah, so it suggested things that didn't really exist. So I think you both had that experience, like type is microflow, for example, that it was not part of the current pluggable widget API. So it was really suggesting something that could be true, but wasn't. So that's also very hard to debug, because you think, I know microflows, so this is right, but it isn't. Thanks, Tobias. And then moving on, before we move on, did we succeed? One of you?
Partially. Not all the features. I think it was great to show something, drawing, choosing the color. This is great, but the final thing is to save the image in Mendix, which is not successful.
Yeah. And I think moving on, because we have just a very few clips ahead of us, what you see here is that you can also use it for other things than just the development. So when you use the scaffolding stuff from Mendix, then you get a lot of files out of the box. And what you see here is that Tobias is asking for what do I see here and what is it doing? And then the assistant is capable of saying, well, this feature is used for this. And I think it was for the testing or the automatic refresh when you hit save in your widget development. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was very capable of explaining what the feature did. So if you see something that's not very known to you and you feel like, well, I want to learn more on this, you could dive into the documentation, or you could hand out to an assistant to help you move on. This is also something I found quite surprising. At this moment, Tobias adds the entire widget as, please keep in mind that this is my current version, and then hitting enter. And ChatGPT started to review it without asking, but it was giving like, oh, you can do some enhancements here, and I like your current setup, but maybe using this is better, without asking. So just please remember this for me. Here you have some feedback. You almost think it's Dutch. And then I think this is the last one. Yeah, this is Gemini actually. And Tobias, maybe you can walk us through. We won't let this on for ages, but what did it do?
Yes, so since ChatGPT failed to save the image, I tried Gemini, and it gave me this outrageous line of code with Japanese or characters in it. Yeah, that was really strange.
Yeah, it's also quite hard to debug. I think you eventually asked, what does it say?
Yes, and then I asked it about that line of code, and it then apologized like it does, and said that obviously that this does not work.
Yeah. Yeah, so we also stopped this experiment. So it was dead on arrival. So overall learnings, and I think we can do this together as well. Yeah. Validate the output. It's quite a common one, but see what was generated and if it's really fitting your purpose. And if you asked all the right questions, because it's the same with a regular refinement with your customer, or when you're doing a peer review, you're also looking for things in your daily Mendix work. Think like that and ask the same questions on your widget output, I would say so. Do a security review. This wasn't a component of this presentation at all. So there was no questions asked on how that would work, if it was governed enough. Do you think that it was safe enough if you continued this journey, or would you miss out on certain things?
I think so. I think it would be, yeah, some questions I really challenge, and we just saw the back and forth of questioning and prompting. I just would go, it's hard to answer, because some questions you do, he answers you perfectly. Some questions he really messed up. I would say 50-50. That's my gut feeling.
Sure, well. Another one, contextual prompts. We mentioned that already. Having very to-the-point specific prompts with adding some context. So I want to change this piece of logic, and I want to add that feature to that piece of logic is easier to answer. But also adding your own documentation. So if you know something on the library you're actively using, then you could add that. the library is used or is working like this, or just copy paste something from the Mendix documentation, which you want to apply to your piece of code, then that's working already better as well, because then it just can replicate whatever you just gave the assistant. See it as a pair programmer, so not as a replacement or a buddy that's fixing everything for you, but just use it hand in hand in what you're actually doing yourself. Privacy considerations. We did use for this widget not a very, how would you say it, a privacy heavy use case.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Not really like nothing really particular or specific to a client or something. It's really simple.
But what the assistant is also very capable of is reading Excel documents and giving you some prompt or script to process that Excel file to a CSV, for example, and doing that in a JavaScript thing somewhere in a Azure function, whatever. You can use that as well. But then if you're using the free ChatGPT version, then it's all America. And they have that as well. So it's also a consideration, especially when you're using it for business purposes. And then the available knowledge. It's also something good to keep in mind. You can read a lot on it on the internet. I'm not totally up to date of the ChatGPT 4.0, what benchmark date it was, but I think it's now capable of handling half-year-old data. So everything that happened after, we still have no government, for example. It's not there yet. Just because of the knowledge that was fed into the model. And perhaps most remarkably, eventually, all assistants we were using, they went hallucinating at least once, just by spreading things that were not true, changing things along the way where you did not ask for, repeating itself, looping in an endless loop. Magic happened. So it's also something. That's yeah, but not already after 1 hour. That's
but it's also
yeah. And then another quick summary on writing a good prompt. Specific, we already mentioned. Context, we already mentioned. Give examples. So if you have some good examples of the thing you actually want to build, give it to them. And I'm not sure. No, we will come to that later. Give it constraints. So if you want to upload something, it's also good to add things like, and it should be at maximum 5 megabytes, or I want to have a color picker, but the button shouldn't be bigger than the canvas, for example. Be very specific so it has something to work with. Explanations, ask for explanations and learn from it along the way. And iterate. So it's really the pair programming, and you saw that happening with the save logic, the commit logic. Then you had to iterate over and over and over again to reach a certain point. And moving on, we also have some future explorations. And it's a bit unfortunate that Code Whisperer was not in this presentation, because what you saw here were general purpose AI assistants. So you can ask whatever. They can also read you bedtime stories. But they can also code for you. But you also have some code-specific tools available. The fun thing is that in the backend, they are mostly using either OpenAI's GPT or Gemini's or BART or whatever. So the results may be the same, but they do it in line. So while you're typing, you could add your documentation first, and then it will create the code that's in line with your documentation. So it's a bit of another way of working. We pick the assistants because they're more known to the broad public, but it's good to know that those are out there as well. And yeah, this will be almost the closing part, because research showed that when the assistants, they go rogue and they don't know it anymore, you can always feed them coffee, because they learn that humans who are drinking coffee and had a good night of sleep, they perform better. So the model is actually giving better answers if you say, you drank a good cup of coffee and now answer my question. The results are better then. So it might help you one day. And that will be it, even before 8. So that's very nice. I want, first of all, before we go to a Q&A, a very big applause for everyone who helped during this session, because we had Barbara, she did a lot. She's not here yet, but therefore we had pizza. And I think the pizza was very nice. We have Dave sitting here. Dave. We have Yolanda, Natalie, Stijn. They all help an awful lot. And of course, our researchers, our R&D department, the widget gurus, the AI assistant knowledgers. So yeah, please big hands for them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We do enjoy hosting this kind of meetups, and I think many more partners in the ecosystem, in the community like that as well. And therefore, we have this pretty feedback form. So if you can scan it, then the results end up at Mendix itself as well. So we can improve upon the meetups in the future. And while you are scanning that, are there any questions? Because I can imagine, or maybe your own experiences, potentially you used one of the assistants we just touched upon, but we didn't research. Yeah.
So given the examples that we just saw, what would be more efficient to get one of these, say that the or whatever, come up with some basic ideas and building yourself on top of that, or trying to improve and improve and improve using?
Yeah, so a brief summary of the question is what would be more efficient to let the assistant basically lay the foundation and work on top of that with your own IDs, or do it the other way around and keep iterating over and over and over again on that ID and let the assistant basically build the thing itself.
Well, especially since at some point it starts losing.
Yeah.
It seems like the deeper you get into it, the more trouble you get as well.
Yeah, I think hopefully you can answer that in a minute as well. Yeah. But for my personal experience, I did use the assistants to build a web scraper, for example. And I didn't know that much on web scraping, but I needed it. And then I thought, well, now I can do it because I have an AI assistant. And eventually I made it work, but it was the combination between reading documentation, having some basic knowledge on the things I'm asking questions about, and having also some basic questions like, well, I want to use a platform to do web scraping. What should I use for what reason? And that made me already figuring out what to use. And then I asked, what are the main features of this platform, for example? So then you learn while asking, and that makes or allows you to ask better questions moving forward. I think that's, again, it should be a hybrid solution in which you learn something on your own, use the documentation, use the things that you know are true, and use that to ask the right questions and control or check the responses of the assistant. I think that's the most effective, especially with this widget, but maybe you can elaborate on that, but without if you would add the commit part yourself, because you know it because you're a widget developer, I think you could basically finish the widget quite quick.
Yeah, I could, especially the saving part, because it's so specific. I was also wondering if there is a more, let's say, efficient way of saving the record, maybe using the Mendix library and using proper functions to save the record properly, instead of doing the, let's say, workaround of giving a string attribute, unlimited string attribute to store the base 64 and use a Java action to convert to a file document. I could do that myself. I already did that myself, but I was expecting something if the Copilot could give me an answer more, let's say, professional at some point.
Yeah, you were giving workarounds for the assistant to make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any more questions? Yeah.
What I would like to see is, because you can, of course, always make your own ChatGPT extension.
Yeah.
Just feed it with all the marketplace widgets and then see what the answer will give you.
Yeah.
So I would like the Mendix start creating its own, just
assistant.
like in the modeler widget bot, give us a widget bot.
Yeah. So the question is, can't we just create our own assistant by using the ChatGPT assistants? You can create them online, at least for the paid program and potentially also for the free program, but by feeding it with your own contextual data, basically, and then adding marketplace content. I do have some good news for you because recently the AWS Code Whisperer was changed to Q. Then the Q Developer Pro license, I think it's only $21 a month. Then you can add library documentation to your assistant. So then it's not really context. It's a bit before that stage, but it should work very effectively. So I was also thinking on adding React, adding the Mendix documentation to it, and then start asking questions, because then I would expect that it's very capable of handling the queries in a more efficient way. So it's I like the thought, and it should be possible now. But it's for a follow-up or maybe a video. Or yeah.
If you would give the assistant like the basic GitHub signature widget, which is already available, give that as an example, would be able to elaborate and use that.
Yeah,
for your own.
Yeah. So the question is, if we get the signature widget, which is already doing something like the drawing, can't we just change that by asking questions on that widget to change it to the drawing widget? And I think the question would be.
Yeah. Should it be a good approach? Yeah, could try that.
I think it will be more easy, basically, because you already have that complex Mendix part is already in there. So if you give it something to learn from, especially the very Mendix specific things, it's super powerful. If there are good examples in the marketplace of the most recent platform widgets, for example, and there are features in there you want to reuse, just say, I want this feature from that widget doing that, but then in this code set, I think it's very capable of doing that.
How able is it to use site or documentation online? Because I know that ChatGPT is able to some web browsing. I'm not sure about Copilot. They are also able.
So the question is if the assistants can also use documentation online, found online, so actively searching for stuff, as the ChatGPT is capable of at least doing that. But for Copilot, we're not sure. So maybe Eric?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. He gave me very good examples on how, for instance, create a property for the widget. He gave me some good answers. But I think old answers, because in custom widgets, the old-fashioned way of doing widgets, you can ask for an entity or a microflow, and that's what he told me to do. But we're building pluggable widgets, which is not supported anymore. So I think it can run, can look for documentation, but it's a little bit outdated from a point of view.
Yeah,
Copilot.
From my experience with the web documentation, if you want an assistant to use something else than its own knowledge, then you should be explicitly asking it. You can also ask like a Word document and ask questions about Word document, but then you shouldn't add the Word document and ask a generic question. And you should say, I just gave you a Word document and I'm asking this. Or I want you to have a look at this documentation and then answer this. And it should be capable of doing that, but you need to be explicit in telling it about its sources. At least from my experience in other things. Good question. Then I would suggest, because it's 8:06 and we need to leave the building at 9, which we all think is very still, we can have some drinks downstairs, so hopefully you enjoy them. If there are any questions, just find some of us or each other, and hopefully you will stay around for some drinks. And then see you at the next one. Yeah.
Right.